I was 1 second late. I was 1 second late. Let the Fs reign the comment section, or the chat, I guess we call it. Good evening, everybody. How goes the weekend for those who still benefit from this thing called freedom? It's 7 o'clock in Montreal. Curfew starts at 8 o'clock. We are entering week forever of the 4-week curfew. But tomorrow, thank goodness, no joke, 4 months into the curfew, it's going back to 9:30. There's no rationale. There's no way of explaining this. This was a 4-week curfew in as much as it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve a year ago, over Christmas or over January, to alleviate the burden on the hospitals. We're 4 months into it. The numbers are lower now than they were when the 4 weeks went into place, and it's still in effect. But Supreme Leader, Sunset Thief, François Legault, is extending it to 9:30 for the summer. So thoughtful and wonderful. And on that subject, yesterday I was documenting, participating in, expressing my opinion, dare I say it, during the protest in Montreal to protest these measures. And for those of you who haven't seen the video, it's out there. It was great. It was a non-vlog vlog, or it was an actual vlog, VLOG, not VLAWG. And I jogged back, ran around there, took some detours, documented it, 24.4 kilometers round trip. And it was encouraging to see people out there peacefully protesting for their freedoms. A little discouraging to see some of the chatter on Twitter and Facebook and other platforms where people talking about ignorance in the crowd and a parade of imbeciles who have the audacity to, some of them weren't wearing masks outside, despite certain studies that are shedding some light on the transmission rates, outdoor transmission rates. Check out the article in the Irish Times from the beginning of April. But a lot of people were there, and it was nice to see people protesting for their rights in a peaceful manner. And, the only problem is the media doesn't want to cover it because, I don't know, tens of thousands, some said upwards of 70,000 people peacefully protesting. That's not newsworthy. But, showing when the police felt the need to initiate tear gas at the end of it, that the media will report on. And the media will actually have the audacity to blame, and they did this, to blame disrupting the rollout of the vaccine on that protest. A protest, the itinerary of which was announced 4 weeks ago, the itinerary of which was one block, a massive block, but around the Olympic Park. And they had to reschedule or reschedule by location. Apparently a dozen vaccinations that were being given at the Olympic Stadium, even though the itinerary did not interfere with it. But the media, running hardcover for the hand that feeds them, actually has the audacity to say that this protest disrupted the rollout of the vaccine, as if a 4-hour protest explains the year-long debacle that has been Canada's response to this. Okay, I've fallen behind, and that is already one of the things I want to say. Liz W. says, Kennedy is threatening a curfew here in Alberta as well. Sad summer. It's a teddy bear icon. Let me see if I can bring that chat back up, and then that's going to bring us into... I can't bring the actual chat, but we got Tall Skinny Geek says, YouTube is only showing your sidebar video in my subscriptions list. Audio is fine. And I think that might be because I created a link for tomorrow's stream today, and maybe it interferes with the existing one. Oh, here it is. Kennedy is threatening a curfew here in Alberta. I overheard, for anybody who did not see the video yesterday, at the end of the protest, or when I was leaving, too bad some rioted and got arrested. I didn't see any rioting when I was there, or even in the news. I saw maybe some people, I don't know, I saw police deploying tear gas at the end of the parade, the protest. I overheard some police talking at the end of the protest when I was about to leave, saying how, people shouldn't complain, that they're saying they're in prison. If they want to know what prison is like, they should go to prison. And I was just like, I could not believe that, on the one hand, this was the perspective of that particular individual police officer, not generalizing, but that the standard for freedom now is, if you're not in jail, you're free. Andrei Tukulescu says, Supreme Leader Legault even came out and said we are a tiny minority and that the people shouldn't give us too much attention. even if he's right, that's a problem. I don't think he's right, because I talk to a lot of people who are very silent majority, very to the left of me, and I'm still center, I believe, who are fed up with this and who don't think that there's any correlation between what's being done now and what the problems are, or what the issues actually are. Hello from Maui, vacation from California with family. Dave Minky, enjoy Maui. Gosh darn it. Mandalore Wise 101 says, have you heard about Louis Rossman's recent injustice by the New York City DCA? Let me go ahead and decline that call. I don't know who that was. Now I lost my screen. Okay. The New York system, where they issued a bogus fine of $0, but since the New York court system is broken, he is unable to respond, and they'll charge him $15,000 for failure to appear for his hearing. I have not heard about that, but we'll get to it. Now, I'm not sure that we're going to get to it. Sorry, I should say that. I'm not sure that we're going to get to it, but I'll look into it. Let me just take a screenshot. Okay, so the protest was peaceful. Tons of people. People in their houses were actually on their front porches encouraging, cheering support, which is interesting. There were some who were quite literally giving the middle finger to everybody going down and saying, I hope you die of COVID. I swear to you. But the person, it was not something to film. The person was clearly unwell psychologically and physically. There was someone else who also appeared to be somewhat distressed, sweeping the sand off her front steps and yelling at the crowd. But it was interesting to see that there's some people who are, it's the majority of the people, even viewing from the side, seem to be very supportive. It was interesting. It's just the fact that people are not protesting more. The absolute loss of everything that made our country and province a free country and province is madness. John Bork, Viva Viva. So, does Barnes wear I'm back, people. Well, I wanted to bring up the chat that said, does Barnes wear pants during the stream? But I think I lost that. And I'm going to stop messing around because I'm getting myself pulled out. Montreal protest news. Thousands protest COVID health measures in Montreal. Stephen Goldstein, I'll check out the link when I'm not doing the stream, but everybody can check out that link if they want. Stephen Goldstein, protest against COVID-19 measures in Montreal ends with tear gas and arrest due to more aggressive, smaller group. Hey, there's the old expression that if you have a tool, you're going to use it. And when hundreds of police officers show up with tear gas, one could even say there's a psychological expectation to use some of the weaponry that you showed up with. I didn't see anything remotely that could warrant any form of police intervention. I left at 2:00, however. Undoubtedly, people get rowdy. Who knows? Got a haircut a while back. Okay, so hold on. I'm back, people. No more F's here. And let us do the standard intro disclaimers. And can everyone see me now? Okay, we can. Standard disclaimers. Thank you all for the super chat. I may not get to them, and if it's going to upset you if I don't get to your super chat, don't give it. I don't want people feeling upset. You should also know YouTube takes 30% of all super chats. Some people don't want to feed this particular beast. There are other places you can support us. You'll hear it 15 times from Barnes. VivaBarnesLaw.locals.com is one place. There's membership. There is Patreon for me. There is Subscribestar and merch, if anybody wants that. And what else? No legal advice. And I think that typically covers it. Oh, yeah, don't post abusive stuff. Spamming and threats are really the only thing that get you blocked or on timer out, whatever. People refuse to leave the street. They threw projectiles towards officers, said Manuel Couture, a media relations officer at the SPVM. I saw none of it, and nobody should behave like that, period. Okay, on the menu for tonight. It's a big one. Robert, I think, has some high hopes that we can get through all of these subject matters. Okay, before we even get into that. NGE Fan 76 says, hey, Viva, saw your bit about Montreal's Olympic Stadium being a waste of money. What are your feelings about the former tenants, the Washington Nationals? That's before my time. All I know is that the Olympic Stadium is the exemplification. It is the perfect example of incompetence, corruption, and everything that is wrong and that can go wrong with certain projects. We're still paying for it. It never worked as it was supposed to work. The roof was never a retractable roof. The concrete was poor quality because of apparently using cheaper level concrete after having gotten a bid so as to make maximum profits. Just a load of garbage through and through. But it's become an icon of what Montreal is, to some extent. But it was a beautiful, ambitious building, and now it's host to an amazing outdoor skate park, if anybody's around here. If Project Veritas can prove CNN promoted Biden via positive news stories and block negative stories that can be considered a, quote, contribution in kind, end quote, and considered a campaign contribution to Biden. I'm going to ask Robert that. We've discussed this in the past. And the issue is, nothing about redoing anything, just rather about potential sanctions if there were, in fact, what could be deemed to be contributions in kind. We're going to talk about that tonight, which is Happy Pascha, Chadwick Bolander, Christ is risen. Indeed, he is risen. I am not a religious person. I don't know what holiday it is, but Happy Pascha if people are celebrating. Okay, on the menu for tonight. Let me just go ahead and get my notes. There's a lot, and some of them are going to be much more interesting than others. Canada, for those of you who don't know, two interesting things that Robert is going to blow a gasket on. One of which is this thing, those of you who know about it, if you've seen my video, Bill C-10, which is an act to amend the Broadcasting Act, which would potentially, because of a last-minute inclusion to exclude user-generated content that was, at the last minute, removed. So they eliminated the inclusion of an exclusion. So now the amendments to the Broadcasting Act, in theory, will apply to all user-generated social media content. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about something a judge said out of British Columbia, that if you throw a party in violation of public health ordinances, and I'm quoting verbatim but paraphrasing, and someone goes and gets granny sick and granny passes away, as far as you're concerned, being the judge, you're guilty of manslaughter. You could be guilty of manslaughter. The idea that if you break these public health ordinances and someone gets ill and then passes away, that the individual who broke the health ordinance to which the infection and the death can be traced back could face manslaughter charges. It'll make for an interesting discussion. I'm going to talk about the raid on Giuliani, which is appears to be another a sledgehammer to a fly, and it seems to be based on the same FARA Act, Foreign Agent Registration Act, that they went after Michael Flynn on. And we're going to talk about what was taken and what was not taken. We're going to talk about, we are going to go after, what's the next one? James O'Keefe suing CNN, but I think we're also going to touch on the New York Times response. And stay tuned, people. We might be seeing a special guest on the sidebar, an additional sidebar. We'll see what happens. We got Pasha here. Pasha's Greek Easter. I submit Barnes will be wearing a bow tie on top of tropical shorts below. We may not see the tropical shorts. And I'm wearing shorts if anybody's interested, but nobody's really interested in the fact that I'm wearing shorts, but a nice button-up shirt. Etimin Lilly says, really great to see so many people out to protest in Montreal. Really not great to see how petty and pathetic the police are in Quebec and Ontario. I always thought Montreal would be a place I would like to live. Not so much now. There were some videos where the police were seemingly pepper spraying an individual, like with a big, thick hose. I don't know how pepper spray works, but for no reason that I could see in the 30-second video. The problem is I just don't share these videos that I don't have sufficient understanding of context, because it's just too easy to reshare something, that the context is totally off, and I don't want to be a part of that. Maxime Bernier was there. I know I actually ran into the team, his executive team, someone who was holding a banner of Maxime Bernier. I didn't see Maxime, but I was sort of mid-range in the protest. Okay, let me just actually text Barnes and make sure that he's coming, because if not, I'm gonna have to get started on my own. Computer restarted there in a sec. Okay, perfect. Robert is having a boomer moment before we even go live. Okay, so James O'Keefe, Babbitt, the civil suit that's coming, but it's going to mostly focus on qualified immunity, which is an interesting concept out of the States. the Fed charges on Chauvin and what they had in store for Chauvin in the event of an acquittal. The Alaska raid to retrieve Nancy Pelosi's stolen laptop. Amazing stuff. Second Amendment case going to SCOTUS, which is a very interesting case, and it's a very interesting situation. Okay, what else? The Arizona audit update. Bagel Bites lawsuit, if anybody's interested in a cheesy subject matter. All right, and that's about it. We got CHOP, FDA, Menthol, the Menthol ban, which I think is... We'll talk about it when we get there. But until Robert gets here, we'll go over the CRTC Canadian issue. So for anybody who doesn't know, coming out of Canada, we have the Broadcasting Act, which is a law that is intended to promote Canadian content, to promote and encourage Canadian content, and is, in a sense, the Canadian economy, because it requires public broadcasters on the legacy media platforms, radio and television, to show a certain amount of Canadian content, Canadian produced content. So it's intended to promote Canadian content, promote Canadian culture, which is ironic given the fact that Justin Trudeau doesn't think Canada has a core culture, but that's a separate political issue. So the Broadcasting Act has always applied to radio and television. But what we've seen in the last few years, but especially over the COVID pandemic, was the surge in online streaming by way of content. And the Broadcasting Act, which I don't know when it was created, but I think it was before the advent of the internet, or before the internet became what it is, doesn't, the Broadcasting Act does not cover the internet streaming. So the amendment, in theory, was just supposed to bring these big streaming platforms, Netflix, I can't think of another one, Hulu, maybe Hulu's one. It was supposed to bring online streaming under the auspice, I don't know if that's the right word, but under the application, under the authority of the Broadcasting Act. People were concerned that if it covers anything on the internet, you don't want it to cover user-generated content. You don't want it to cover YouTube channels. You don't want it to cover Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram. So they had included in this amendment, Bill C-10, a specific exclusion that would specifically exclude user-generated content. Okay, agree or disagree with Bill C-10. Apparently the Liberal group, the Liberal government, met quietly and at the last minute, or relatively recently, removed the exclusion of user-generated content. The result of which, for anybody who hasn't seen it, JJ McCullough is another Canadian YouTuber. He put out a video on this, JJ McCullough, MUCULLOUGH. By removing the exclusion, in theory, the Broadcasting Act will apply, if not to specific YouTube channels or to specific Facebook accounts, it could in theory apply to Facebook and YouTube's platforms. So it's bad one way, it's bad the other. In theory, if the Broadcasting Act were to apply to me, and I would have to create a certain amount of Canadian content. First of all, I don't know how much more than 100% content I could create. I'm Canadian. Everything I create is by definition Canadian content, but I talk about American stuff. That might not be Canadian under the point system of the Broadcasting Act. I may be in violation of the Broadcasting Act if it's going to apply to YouTube channels. Is the content I make going to be deemed to be Canadian content? And how would that work if the Broadcasting Act is going to apply to the channels themselves? Would I be in violation just by the content I create? So it's an insanely dangerous thing to even think about. And I think we can all have our thoughts as to why they would even have the motivation to do this. But the flip side is, if it's not going to apply to channels, individual channels, it might just apply to the platform itself. And so you'll have an entirely new interface of YouTube in Canada, which YouTube as an online platform is going to have to promote Canadian content. So it won't, the channels themselves, if I do, I don't know, a strictly review of Hollywood movies, maybe the CRTC won't apply to me. It won't punish me. It won't fine me or sanction me or whatever. But YouTube is going to have to promote Canadian channels, and it's going to have a Canadian looking interface, and it might, demote certain channels. So it's all out. It's I would say outrageous in the sense that it is nothing less than an attack on free speech at the most individual level. And one can have their theories as to why it's being done. An easy hypothesis is that the pillars, the Fifth Estate, the CBCs, the CTVs, the mainstream media who are only on, by and large, television, radio. Nobody's listening, nobody's watching, and they're not doing too well on YouTube. And so it's very easy to see that this could, in theory, be a pretext to artificially prop up these flailing and failing and dying media platforms that simply can't compete on YouTube with independent user-generated content like myself and like others. I might be a little, what's the word, lofty in terms of what I think of myself, but it's quite easy to see how it's being done to artificially prop up and help the mainstream media on the YouTube, because there's no doubt that if YouTube comes down with an interface that says we have to promote Canadian content, YouTube's going to promote the CBC the same way the government promotes CBC. Prop it up, maybe not subsidize it, but make it more viewable because it's Canadian content and they want to be compliant with the legislation of the federal government. So it's easy to see what is going on. It's easy to see how this can go wrong. Bill C-10, it's just a terrible idea. I think at its core, to even go after the internet, it's not what the internet was supposed to be about, governed by the Broadcasting Act, but it certainly was not meant to restrict what user-generated content we could put online, and individuals, how they can go about expressing them freely and being seen freely and by their own merits on the platform itself. Bill C-10 is just a backdoor to Trudeau's goal of communism controlling the populace. He has the support of each province and party dictatorship. There is, like I said in my video, there's a very disconcerting MO to be seen. Modus operandi. Let me see where Robert is. There's a very disconcerting MO, which is passing big laws during a pandemic. He did it, Justin Trudeau did it with the Order in Council for the firearms ban in last year. Now, that regulation allowed for an Order in Council, which is effectively an executive order of sorts, lack of a better word. It's an executive order where by issue of Order in Council, whoever is the deputy minister can just basically declare something, modify an existing law if the law allows for modifications by way of Order in Council. And it would be up for the next government to change it. This case, pushing through Bill C-10 while Canada is in the throes of a crisis, while the government is failing to respond to the current crisis of vaccine rollout and response to the pandemic and to the crippling of the economy, to ram this thing through and then to modify it at the last minute to exclude an exclusion that was included at the last minute to quell concerns. And if anybody has not seen Guilbeault's interview on, I think it's The National, Guilbeault is the minister of, I forget what, his fumbling, flailing, incoherent response to why the removal of the exclusion was a non-issue. An outright embarrassment. It is like someone who can't even believe someone is questioning him on the supreme authority of the government to change at the last minute something that was included for a specific reason. Patrick Harry, does the FBI get into Paul Barnes's computer? We're going to see. The chat wants to know if the FBI got into your computer, ! LOL. Okay, just as I said that, I saw him come in. So I hope that enlightens everyone on the Bill C-10. If you're Canadian, I don't, go straight to your member of parliament. I think that's from one of the episodes of The Simpsons. I'm going straight to be member of parliament. I am. It's bogus. It's not how laws are supposed to be passed. Their answers to very simple, straightforward questions are embarrassing but revealing. It's not up to good. I'm putting it this way. It's up to no good. That Bill C-10 is up to no good. Targeting user-generated content. They are going after the small creators who are destroying the institutional media because they actually dare show up on the street and actually talk to people and actually see what's going on and actually try to understand lawsuits instead of just recycling the Associated Press summary or other reporters who didn't even read the proceedings. They just rely on Twitter and these summaries for their news feeds. Okay, with that said, Robert looks like someone who has been hacked by the FBI. Robert, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, my computer completely crashed. I had to bring in the other computer from the other room. I've been gone for a week or so, and so yeah, I'll figure it out. Hey, I'm proud of myself. I managed to get the new one set up.
Well, you look good. I just noticed I look particularly red for a second. You look good. You look actually smooth, and the framing is good. All right, well done. So, Robert, we won't. I did the Bill C-10. Everyone out there, express your discontent with that. Send it to your member of parliament, whomever. Tag, tweet, and let them know that it's outrageous, and we'll see where it goes. So we don't need to cover that. We'll get to another Canadian subject sooner than later. But Robert, look, we got to start with, I think, the most obvious. Can we start with Giuliani?
Oh, sure.
So Giuliani in another, this wasn't a pre-dawn raid. I don't know if CNN got the heads up to be there to record it. Was it his Washington office or Washington residence that got raided?
I thought it was his Manhattan address.
Manhattan. So his Manhattan residence raided by the FBI again, seizing hard drives, some hard drives, not all. And I made a joke that, that they didn't. Someone had asked, why didn't they seize the hard drive with some Hunter Biden material on it? And I made a joke. They didn't seize that hard drive because of the Hunter Biden material on it. Someone said, well, they're executing a warrant, so they only have certain things they're going after. I didn't respond to that response, but my understanding is if you're going after hard drives, you got to seize all of them because you don't know what's on what. It's not like there's an inventory on a hard drive. So we know that it has to do with the FARA Act. Apparently, we don't know if there's an indictment. We don't know what the charges are, but we suspect it has to do with lobbying that he did on behalf of Trump in 2019 with the Ukrainians. Do we know what this is about, really?
Well, I mean, I think Lee Smith wrote a good piece about it that I think is correct. He wrote, I think he wrote the book Plot Against the President. And basically it's payback is my view. I mean, whatever the legal pretext is, we haven't seen the search warrant affidavit, nor has Giuliani. He's only seen what they requested. They may have listed on what they gave him what crimes were being investigated, but that isn't always the case. The assumption, I believe, is that it must be the Foreign Agents Registration Act, somehow that he was working as an agent of the Ukrainian government. I mean, which makes no sense because that never happened. So it's not just if you're an agent for anybody who's overseas. I mean, the Foreign Agents Registration Act is supposed to be about representing foreign governments and just disclosing that for lobbying purposes. And what legislation was he supposed to have been working on? So, I mean, it's a ridiculous reach. No surprise, the Southern District of New York. What it looks like is simply payback. He is being punished because he exposed the corrupt family of our current president, his fraudulency II.
Well, I did hear that apparently it might have had to do with. I'm not gossiping. I read an article, and it had to do potentially with not respecting contributions to campaign. He was trying to siphon in money from the Ukraine for political action committees that would otherwise not be allowed, and that was the foreign lobbying violation, is taking foreign monies to use it to influence the elections. I mean,
that really wouldn't count. That wouldn't be under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. You could argue that, and they really wouldn't have a donation angle either. I mean, that I can see. So it's far from, I mean, it's a complete reach. It's an extraordinary legal reach. And the probabilities that he made that mistake are extraordinarily low. And so problem one is there doesn't appear to be any criminal conduct worth investigating. Secondly, to the extent they're claiming it was FARA, it would be one of the rarest FARA prosecutions ever brought. This was all reinstated and reinvigorated by the Obama shadow government that was left over by Trump mistakenly. And so that's the second problem, would be the obvious selectivity of the prosecution. Third problem is these warrants for things like electronically stored material have been problematic for a while. And even though courts have been clear that, you have a right to go in and look for a particular thing, that really shouldn't give you the right to seize the entire computer or seize the entire phone. And you're supposed to go through these very strict protocols, especially when it involves an attorney who represents clients, because you'd be looking at attorney-client privilege materials. You're supposed to go through special protocol so they never see it, never look at it. That it's put in, they call it taint team procedures, but most of those are a crock. They really should be very independently maintained, independently reviewed, completely separated and segregated. They're abusing that as well. And this is just because they expect that the courts in New York won't meaningfully enforce the Fourth Amendment, even as to the lawyer for the ex-president, and even though he is the former United States attorney for the Southern District of New York. So it reveals the scope and scale of the problems. My guess is that they had requested this previously and that it had been turned down because the investigation purports to stem from 2019. And so it appears that, Rudy Giuliani, in trying to defend the president against the impeachment charges, was looking at the information related to corruption involving U.S. political officials, including the Biden family in Ukraine. And they're trying to say somehow it was criminal to expose the Biden family's long history of corruption. I mean, you even had the Russian officials saying that America, by its own definition, is no longer a democracy. That that they are what they're accused of with Navalny, which is really not credible allegations. We're doing times 10. If Putin was going after the lawyer for the leader of the opposition and doing mass raids on him, we would be going nuts about it. They'd be issuing sanctions tomorrow over it.
It would not even. I mean, it would be outrageous on its face. And the fact is, we haven't seen any indictment. We haven't seen,
There couldn't be yet, because a search warrant can't be executed if there's an indictment already issued, because that's illicit use of the grand jury. So this is purely a discovery technique. But it's clear harassment on Giuliani and the president. It's also sending a message: if you expose their corruption, they'll try to put you in prison for what they did.
But hold on. So then explain which judge do they go to get a warrant, which has to be necessarily an ex parte hearing to get a warrant to seize the hard drive? These are someone asked me, and I don't think it is. It's not the FISA courts. This is a standard court.
Oh, no. This would be a United States District Court in the Southern District of New York, maybe a federal magistrate, but usually a district court judge for something like this. And it likely had to have been signed off on by someone the Republicans let breeze in to be the criminal section chief for the Department of Justice, even though she had a notorious history of these kind of matters related to and had ties to the whole Russiagate scandals. But the Republicans, being the dead weight that they are in the Senate, let her get through with ease without even meaningful interrogation through the appointment process. But because anytime you do a search warrant for electronic materials, that requires specialized approval and specialized warrants. They often breach that these days, but there should be remedy for it. The second is they have to, if it involves a high-profile political target and someone who has attorney-client materials in their file, usually has to get the criminal section chief's personal signature. So that's who, that was now, then they just go to any district court judge or magistrate. And these days, a lot of judges are just rubber stamps. You could, the government could blow a leaf across the desk of many judges and they'd sign it. I mean, it's a disgrace how judges have not become meaningful, sort of meaningfully interposed like they're supposed to be for the search warrant process.
But what is the standard threshold to get the issuance of a search warrant? I mean, you have
to show two things: probable cause of that this individual's committed a crime, number one. Number two, that it's kind of supposed to be the only means you get it. Like, the idea is that it's exigent. You have to do the search. You can't trust the person just to subpoena the evidence. You have to get it individually because you're worried about it being destroyed. And that's why you have to do, a tactical search warrant raid. But you're only looking for evidence. You're only supposed to get approval there's particularity as a requirement of the Fourth Amendment, that you can only get evidence that's specifically related to the probable cause for which you have an indictment. That's where the seizure of all the materials is way too broad. I'm sure the warrant probably, you never know these days, but to conform to the Constitution's requirement under existing case law, they will have to establish that they are going to have a strict procedure by which nobody that's part of the investigative team looks at any of this information until first it's screened out by an independent taint team, in which Giuliani usually has some role in that if it's done right. I mean, they increasingly violate that. But the way to think of it is it's like if you have the right to search certain files in a file cabinet, doesn't give you the right to seize the whole file cabinet. Well, but it's what they've been doing.
And now Beavis Wallace says, Giuliani said in an interview he asked the FBI to take the Hunter Biden disk drives and they refused. The warrant said take all electronic drives, but they refused Hunter Biden data. We're getting conflicting versions of that. Apparently people say that they did take all the drives, but I mean, we'll see. I had read the same thing actually, Beavis. So we'll see what turns out to be true. But this is all.
And Giuliani and his lawyer both said that. So unless, why would they lie about that? So, I mean, I don't see any reason for them to lie about that. The Turley is right that you wouldn't take the person's word for what's on a particular computer file. Typically, that if it says seize all electronic files within now, that's, in my view, that's an overbroad warrant out of the gate. Presumably, they were authorized to seize it, but not look at it until somebody else looks at it. But assuming that protocol is in place, they should seize everything. They shouldn't refuse to seize the Hunter Biden evidence. It's a sign of how overtly political the case is, that they didn't even follow their own search warrant directions because they don't want to say they have the Hunter Biden files in their custody or possession, apparently.
And now, so 63 Ramblers asks, can Rudy now force the contents of the entire Hunter thumb drive into the public record as his case plays out? Can he force any of this into the public record? I mean, I suspect.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no limits on him. But like sometimes the government will lie to people and say, hey, if you're a witness in front of the grand jury, remember there's grand jury secrecy. Grand jury secrecy doesn't apply to the witness. Grand jury secrecy only applies to the grand jurors, the prosecutors, and the investigators, for which they have no problem leaking anyway. But putting that aside, it doesn't apply to a witness. It never does. But they try to trick people into believing
that. I don't know if this person is being ironic. I will take this as irony. I don't know that I ever was relevant, incidentally, but the issues are relevant. So they seize all this stuff. Standard protocol. Do they have to mirror it and give a copyright back to Giuliani? Does he have any control?
Yes. And frankly, they should do that at the scene. I mean, they've been getting sloppy now for years. The protocol, my view is the protocol is that it should be more restrictive than it is right now anyway. But even under the existing protocol, what you're supposed to do is you're not supposed to seize it. You're supposed to bring the tech people with you to mirror it and leave everything there. And then you're supposed to make sure those mirrored drives, nobody looks at them until it goes through an independent team that has nothing to do with the investigation. Now, these taint team procedures have been a joke because they leak like a sieve anyway. And in my view, it's still a Fourth Amendment violation because you seized information you weren't entitled to look at in the first place. And then that includes a magistrate. That includes any investigator, prosecutorial team, anybody who, even regardless of other part of the prosecution, the government agents looking at stuff they ain't got no right to.
Well, so that's going to be the bigger question: is what's going to be the fruits? What is it? The fruits of the poisonous tree or the poison fruits? What I mean, is this going to be a case of them? Oh well, we didn't get him on the FARA, but look, we found tax evasion and all some other stuff, or even
they can't look at that. And if they do, it's a major Fourth Amendment violation. So they can only look at what's relevant to the issues under investigation, no further. And if there's attorney-client privilege materials, they have to go back in front of the judge to request that materials, and before they can ever look at anything related to it. So now the problem you have here is you have politically motivated courts in the Southern District of New York that aren't meaningfully scrutinizing is it a coincidence that all these cases keep happening in the Southern District of New York?
No,
the Bill the Wall case, the meme case, all defendants that weren't even there. At least Giuliani's in the Southern District of New York. So, but I mean, it's not a coincidence that these extreme abuses are happening with the most politicized department of the entire United States government in the criminal justice arena.
And Bob Whittlefish says, HB emails are online for download unredacted. See your locals board for comments on this. I haven't seen the comments, but I do understand that there's some stuff that's been available.
Oh yeah, a bunch of people have mirrored it and put it out in the public domain. And he's referencing the locals board. He's probably referencing Viva Barnes Law.
We're going to need like a little counter in the back, and it's going to go ping every time you. In fact, I need to let you do a clean one so I can use it for every video. Okay, I mean, so what are the next steps with this? Is there a time frame within which, upon seizure, they have to file charges, or
no? But he can request a return of any seized materials if they haven't done so within a particular time frame. He can bring a Bivens action if he believes that the search warrant is overbroad, either in its actual authorization or in the execution thereof. So he can do either one of those things. So he has certain remedies at this stage of the action. What he did is I think, wisely went to the court of public opinion and pointed out what was happening and how it was happening and the problems related to it. He said the FBI agents that were at the scene were very professional. But obviously the people behind the scenes are the problem.
Oh no, they might be professional, and that's why these things are happening. I mean, it's the weaponizing of everything. I say if someone's guilty of something, they should be found, they should go through a trial and justice should play out. If they don't get convicted, you don't get to say, well, they're guilty anyhow. If they get convicted and it was an unfair trial, there's issues. And everyone is presumed innocent. I'm not trying to say that guilty people should not be punished. What we're seeing is outlandishly weaponized prosecution of political adversaries. You have literally, they're seizing stuff on Giuliani that ostensibly relates exactly to what the Bidens actually did. You have this going on while Hunter Biden is getting book advances and speaking gigs on fake news at universities, despite admissions of having committed felonies. It's like one person's criminal history is the story of their vindication if they're political allies, and one person's criminal history is going to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law if they're political adversaries. And the January 6th riots versus the Summer of Love is the other perfect example. It's one law, two systems. And anyway, so we'll see. Do we expect to hear anything from Giuliani or from the SDNY? Does it if it proceeds to charges?
I mean, they can do something. I mean, I think what they're also trying to do is they're trying to track the trail by which Giuliani got some information. They want to know every source he had for exposing the existing president's corruption. I mean, this is, the degree to which Biden appointees appear to be directly involved in this. This is an actual impeachable offense, as opposed to the nonsense they brought up against Trump, because this appears to be weaponizing the Justice Department to cover up the corruption of the Biden family and punish anyone who has helped expose that, including not only Giuliani, but anybody that Giuliani was talking to. They appear to be looking for the sources of information that Giuliani received.
I hope someone's listening, because not that the impeachment process should be used willy-nilly, like twice in one presidency. The idea that if there is political influence, political pressure to actually use the FBI to sanction, punish, deter, as a reprisal against ideological adversaries who expose the current government's corruption, I don't know what more of an abuse of power one can have than that.
Because what people forget is Giuliani isn't just the lawyer for the ex-president. He was the conduit for a bunch of whistleblowers. And that appears to be what they're looking for. They're looking for who the whistleblowers were, who the different people were. Everybody knows about the laptop guy, but my guess is they're looking for everybody he talked to try to clean things up. I mean, this is while they're also trying to lobby for war in Ukraine. So, I mean, there's sort of a correlation going on. And what's happening in Ukraine, a lot of the corrupt oligarchs there are in political trouble, and the current president is in Zelensky's in political trouble. That's why that they were trying to provoke another war there. And it's the same State Department people are now back in charge who created the first coup in Ukraine that created the debacle in 2014 in the Maidan Revolution. So I think it's all interrelated, and it's just an extraordinary. I don't know if from a federal criminal process we've ever seen this degree of political weaponization of the Justice Department in our history.
And not asking for legal advice, but how do we fight this? I mean, where does it go, Robert? We've been, we have been keeping, or at least trying to keep people optimistic. It seems to be getting more and more egregious, more and more in your face, and less hidden, less concealed.
Well, this is the same week that it came out that the FBI was routinely abusing FISA information to spy on political adversaries for the last 3 years. And the FISA court said, okay, the FBI said, well, they'll never, ever do it again. So that's enough. It shows what a crock the FISA court has become. I think that fighting it out in the court of public opinion is a critical means of resistance, exposing it for what it is, as well as finding legal political remedies where they exist, I think is the other component of it. I think where Michael Malice is right, while he always argues that it's a white pill world and white pill universe, is, though he was slandering lawyers this past weekend, Michael, was that is the fact that the regime wouldn't be resorting to these extreme remedies, these open, overt remedies, if they were truly confident in their position of power. So, I mean, this comes the same week that Joe Biden does a State of the Union that may have been the least watched State of the Union in modern history. So,
but 85% of the viewers approved of the speech when 85% of Americans, and even Snopes, that rag of a fact checker that it is, said, no, this is not true. For anybody who doesn't know, a poll came out that said 85% of Americans were favorable of Joe Biden's speech, when in fact it was 85% of the Democrats who watched it. And I think their sample, this is what blows my flipping mind. The sample was 953 people, from what I understand. Someone in the chat, tell me if I'm wrong. I'm fairly certain that's what I understood. Their sample for a poll to be, Robert, we run polls on Twitter, and it's a much lefter environment than some might think. You'll get tens of thousands of responses, and that is a far more accurate representation of reality than a poll of 1,000 people who watched it, who are probably, hardcore Democrats, who picked up the phone at 4:00 in the afternoon to take a poll. Preposterous.
I think that, a lot of the left was cheering this. They think somehow that everything's going to come crumbling down around Trump. A lot of these are Russiagate truthers who still believe in that insane nonsense. But I think taking on someone like Giuliani is a high risk because of the political public opinion exposure. You saw Giuliani fight back very quickly in the court of public opinion over this. He understood the critical role of it. And the other aspect is he's got a lot of allies still within the FBI, within the police departments in New York, within a lot of the political infrastructure in New York. I think it's a high-risk gamble to be targeting him the way they are. It shows a degree of arrogance, but also fear on their part that they're even trying this.
And Ilaze International says, you guys are #1 law show in the Dominican Republic. Long live Viva Barnes. I don't know if that's true, but I choose to believe it. Okay, now I was about to say, on that subject, by the way, everybody who's watching, tomorrow, Joe Kent, who is running for office, running for Congress in Washington State, we're doing a live stream. I guess we're going to do multiple sidebars in a week now. 6:00 Eastern Standard Time. It's going to be amazing. For anybody who doesn't know who he is, military veteran. It's not a gold star. His wife was killed in action in Afghanistan fighting ISIS. I don't remember what the award is. I don't know any of the names, but he's got a tremendous story running for office, and we're going to go live with him at 6:00 tomorrow. So just a heads up, the link is out, but I'm going to share it around tomorrow. Now, speaking of overt government political reprisals, do we talk about Nick Fuentes and apparently being added to the no-fly list?
Yeah. So, I don't know Fuentes well. I know he's a kid mostly. He just says some controversial things now and then. But the no-fly list, clearly they've been expanding it. They were putting a bunch of people on it after January 6th who weren't even at the Capitol. And Fuentes was there, but he wasn't, to my knowledge, at the Capitol or inside the Capitol at all. Not subject to any criminal investigation. But this was the dangerous ramifications of the Patriot Act and all of its implications. And some of us said so at the time.
So, and we'll back it up just a bit for anybody who doesn't know. I didn't know who Nick Fuentes was. Full disclosure. Now, I know now that I knew who he was because I saw at one point in time, it was a video of Ben Shapiro being, I won't say accosted, but approached by someone on the street saying, let's debate. And Shapiro's with his wife and kid. And I didn't know who the person was. I didn't know it was Nick Fuentes at the time. And I just thought what I thought of that video. I have also seen other videos of Nick Fuentes, not knowing who he was, and it all came together as I was looking into it this weekend. He's, a lot of people are not going to like him. He says incredibly, he's young, like you said, Robert. Young.
Yeah, he's a kid.
I'm not saying controversial for the sake of it. He says controversial things. He says shocking, upsetting, offensive things. And if you don't like it, don't listen to him. Now, he says things about, white nationalism, that America should be an ethno state, that there's already, more non-whites than whites, and it's a problem. He says things which a lot of people are going to find objectively offensive. Oh, yeah. Good. Don't listen to him. Apparently, though, he has been added to the no-fly list. Now, this is on his word. I don't know that there's any evidence to this, and looking into what the no-fly list is, apparently there is no concrete evidence. I don't think they send you an email. He says he was told he's on a no-fly list. Believe him or not, that is actually the secondary issue, whether or not he as an individual was. The no-fly list is the shocking thing that we are now realizing. So give us a history of the no-fly list. I know what it is roughly, but I think you'll be able to describe it better, how it came to be, what the concerns were at the time, and how they've materialized over time.
Well, back when the ACLU was actually the ACLU, they used to fight aggressively against no-fly list and won several cases documenting that it's a constitutional rights violation. So what happens is the FAA or someone in law enforcement, the federal law enforcement, puts you on a list that does not allow you to get on a plane, period. So that if it's your name and your identity, you're put in the system so that you can't book a flight. So Fuentes can find out by just booking a flight and trying to board one, and he'll find out whether he's on a no-fly list or not. I do know people that were put on it because there were people who could not leave D.C. who had already booked flights, who were denied the opportunity to get on those flights because they were told by January 7th that they were on the list. A little bit curious how some of those names got so quickly on such a list. Might raise questions about what exactly happened on January 6th. But you'll have to watch a hush hush at vivabarneslaw.locals.com for that expose.
Hold on a second. Do it again, and I'm not going to make a noise.
No problem. If you want to know what really happened on January 6th, or at least an alternative interpretation thereof, then you can watch it at Hush Hush, which the playlist is keyed and right up at the top and pinned at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
Perfect.
But so however it is that you're just put on a list, you're not told you're put on a list. That's the due process problem they've challenged before. They've said because this is denying you a right. It's to a certain degree, it's a property right or a liberty interest under the Fifth Amendment. If it's federal, it's state, it's the 14th Amendment. And there's also a constitutional right to travel. In fact, one of the concerns at the time of the founding of the founders was making sure you had a right to travel between the states. And so you had a right to travel. That's the reason why the Dunn decision versus involving the state of Tennessee, it's why that no state can require you to register to vote for the presidential election more than 30 days prior to the election, is because of your right to travel, your interstate right to travel. So they have various excuses in the airline context that they can get away with to some degree, but not to the degree of a complete ban, especially a complete ban without notice. So if what he should probably do, or anyone who believes they're on a no-fly list should do, book a ticket, try to fly. And if you can't, then you have factual grounds, and then you can file a suit on rights on challenging that. And there is, again, some good case law the ACLU helped develop. And all this came about because of the Patriot Act. And you can see how it sounded appealing then, right? It was, geez, if we'd had these terrorists on a no-fly list, this couldn't have happened. That was where it started.
I didn't fully. I was not conscious in 2001. I was alive, and I remember the day, and I remember the aftermath. I was not politically, legally conscious of all these things, and I suspect back then I would have supported it. I mean, I suspect back then I would have said, yeah, makes sense if you just slap a bunch of suspected threats on a list and don't let them fly. No more of these issues, without now appreciating A, administrative errors, and B, political reprisals. And but before 9/11, there was no fly list,
nothing on this scale. Nothing on this scale. It was very limited, and there was due process involved almost all the time.
So 9/11 expands it, and now
dramatically expanded it.
There are two types of no-fly lists. You have your terrorist watch list, and you have your no-fly list. And apparently, there's over 1 million people on the terrorist watch list, and under 100,000 on the no-fly list. Or am I mistaken?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows for sure, because not everybody tries to fly. So people could be on a no-fly list and have no idea that that's the case.
And now, so when I said that, Nick Fuentes, whether or not it's true for him, it's an incidental issue, because some people are saying he might have, it was Ian Miles Chong said he might have gotten just kicked off one plane for bad behavior, and we don't know if he's on a no-fly list. Again,
but that's not usually across all airlines. That's pretty rare. If you have a problem with an airline and they get unhappy, they will prevent you from riding their planes, but not every plane. So, not small commuter planes, not international planes, not any plane. It would be, American Airlines will say you can't fly. Sometimes they'll put you on a no-fly list if you created such a history of problems, but then you almost always are notified of it. So and you have an opportunity usually to contest it. One of the big issues the ACLU highlighted was the utter lack of due process in these proceedings. To deprive someone, I litigated it in the tax context, where in the IRS, they used to label people illegal tax protesters, and then they treated them differently based on it, proved that they were not being given adequate notice, and it was a violation of their liberty interest, and ultimately the IRS had to change its policies and no longer do that. They have new creative ways to try to do the same thing, but it's not the same scale. But that's something else that Biden's trying to weaponize too, is now the IRS is going to be going after
they're dumping a lot of money into the IRS to make sure they can go after people.
And something tells me it won't be big Democratic donors at the top of that list.
It won't be the Clinton Foundation, but it'll be Build the Wall. I wanted to bring this up. Back a few years ago, there was a case of a female architect who was foreign-born. She was on the no-fly list, sued, got off it, and the FBI reinstated her the next day. Does being on a no-fly list compromise your ability to cross a border? Because are you not creating...
Well, at least by planes, but usually the no-fly list is just planes. People can infer this if they watch the documentaries about Ed Snowden. Snowden obviously knew that the people that track things on planes aren't tracking other information. So, because he wasn't worried about where he was flying to and the rest being known to the government, which was fascinating. So there's kind of a mismatch there. There should be easy access to those resources such that if you're on no-fly list, you can't travel, period, or vice versa. But that's generally not the case.
I mean, if they basically landlock you for your whole life, if you're in America, the no-fly list,
it's a new Berlin Wall. That's what it is. It's a new Berlin Wall.
And now they can put foreigners on a no-fly list, but that only impacts the foreigners who are not American citizens if they want to enter into or leave the United States.
Right. I mean, remember the left was the one arguing that people that even have connections to terrorism or in terror-oriented countries should have a right to immigrate here. But somehow, if you're on the wrong political side, you shouldn't even be able to fly within your own country.
Well, I mean, what happens hypothetically if someone gets in and then gets put on a no-fly list and can't get out? I mean, what would they have to do then? Make a petition the courts for deportation?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's like I said, it's a functional Berlin Wall if they continue to expand its application.
What is the process to even attempt to get off a no-fly list? You have
you sue. You file suit.
Who do you sue?
It depends on who it is that you believe that puts you on there. Sometimes you sue the FBI, sometimes you sue the FAA. You sue whomever could issue the remedy for you, a relief for you in your case or your context. And he definitely can. So that's why I'd say he should get more evidence that, in fact, or anyone else get evidence that you're on such a list, and then file suit to get yourself removed from it. Also, it's a reminder, everybody, that the Freedom of Information Act and the Privacy Act entitle you to lots of information the government has on you. I utilize it all the time for a wide range of clients in a wide range of cases, because you often find out what's really going on. And you find out what the government has on you, whether the government's been tracking you, whether the government's targeted you. You get all that information, not only what the IRS has, but any other agency has. And so they can only withhold so much. They delay a lot these days, but it's the reason why I'm doing that. It's part of what the Fed, the suit against the Federal Reserve that's coming is about, is FOIA requests that we're going to be making to them in anticipation that they refuse to do so, will file suit. So that's the other way you can also do it, is try to seek information, see if that information comes back a certain way, then file suit related to it, either on a FOIA grounds if they refuse to give it to you, or on grounds they're violating your right to travel if the information discloses that you are in fact on such a list.
Okay, well, that's a wonderful process that they make citizens go through to have basic rights of mobility.
As that Canadian cop told you, hey, as long as everybody's not in prison, we're a free country.
And I'm sure they're listening. They're listening in certain countries and saying, "Dude, you have the carriage in front of the horse on that one." Speaking of civil rights violations, let's go into. I guess we go into Chauvin, because that's the other interesting development of the week. Not to get into the trial, the conviction, yada yada. Apparently, the feds. I don't think it's apparently anymore. The feds had a backup plan, which they have basically executed anyhow, from what I understand. In the event that Chauvin were to have been acquitted, they were going to arrest him in court on civil rights charges, I guess civil rights violations of George Floyd. I understand these things, civil rights, it's section 1983, if I'm not mistaken, and that's when any state actor infringes on your civil rights. One question, if they had this intention at all, why hadn't they done it already? I don't know what the statute of limitations is. How do they bring it only now against Floyd and the other three officers? And what does it mean? I mean, is it a harder burden? I guess it is. It's a stupid question. It's an easier burden to overcome than criminal conviction. But how now, and what do you think of it?
So it's all based on a fiction, a legal fiction, that the federal government is a completely separate government from the state governments, that the federal government is like the government of Britain and the state governments are like the governments of America. Because otherwise, to most people, when they hear this, they say double jeopardy should clearly apply. But the only reason double jeopardy doesn't apply is our courts have created this legal fiction that, these are two totally separate sovereigns, which is particularly absurd in this context because the federal government really is only an extension of the state governments collectively. I mean, that's all it is. It's like the EU to Britain. So the idea that you could be prosecuted by both, say, the EU and Britain would seem absurd. The same is true here. I mean, most people don't understand how this even exists, but it's what they did in the Rodney King case. After those officers were acquitted, they came back and brought federal civil rights charges against them. So it's not a surprise that they were planning this. My guess is that they were waiting for the verdict to make it look politically dramatic. See, you can't trust these state governments, but Biden comes to the rescue and arrests the evildoer. And apparently they're tagging on some charges from some prior years that I don't have a problem with if he's guilty of them. My problem is the double jeopardy should attach. It's a looter, at least in policy. And the way they've dealt with it is the Justice Department generally will not bring successive prosecutions because they know it offends the principle of double jeopardy, even though they can get away with it in the courts.
Well, Stephen Goldstein, who has some smart things to say here, says the feds can charge him regarding any federal crime versus a state crime. So he was convicted
only because we're pretending these are different governments. Imagine if we extended that across the board and said, each county government is really its own government. The city is its own government. So then the city could prosecute you, you get acquitted, then the county can prosecute you, then the county next door can prosecute you. I mean, it's ludicrous. The principle of double jeopardy was that you should not be put twice in jeopardy for your liberty in a criminal prosecution, period. The idea that it wouldn't apply to a foreign government made sense. That's where the dual sovereignty doctrine arose and originated. The idea that it doesn't apply within the United States is nonsense. Again, the federal governments are just the combination of the states. So I have serious problems with it. I mean, it's clearly, if they were prosecuting for something totally different and there was different elements, something that wasn't at issue in the state trial, well, then double jeopardy wouldn't apply anyway. Double jeopardy only applies when it's the same core set of facts, same core legal elements at some level. But that's not what's happening here. This is clearly successive prosecution, and it should. And a honest double jeopardy analysis would say it should not be allowed. Under our existing due process or double jeopardy analysis, it is allowed.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the same thing as a criminal exoneration or conviction versus a civil charge afterwards. These are two different types of criminal, federal and state criminal, where one already resulted in a conviction, and you're bringing additional charges under a different statute, under a different entity of government, for the exact same act for which the individual's already been convicted.
Yeah, in which the same core issues at issue in both trials. Was it reasonable force or not? So would a reasonable officer have used that level of force? So it's the exact same question. That's why it's like, come on. But it's clearly that they want to federalize it across the board. They use it as a pretext to now try to federalize the police department in Minneapolis. They're using Brown and Taylor as a pretext to federalize the police department in Louisville. This is what the Obama administration was doing in 2014 and 15 in places like Baltimore, where it turned out to be a complete disaster. Just take a look at how Baltimore has been since then and its crime rate and violent problems. But it's the nature of this Biden Justice Department. They want to weaponize everything they possibly can, federalize whatever they can, while they have the power and the reins of power over the federal government. And to me, it's at least against the constitutional principles we established in double jeopardy, even though you can get away with it on the existing technicalities that exist within our case law.
In civil rights and hate crimes, where are the trials? Are you tried in front of corrupt siege court juries?
It'll be the federal court, so it'll be a broader jury pool than Hennepin County, actually. So he'll have a more diverse jury pool because it'll include the suburbs around it, maybe even some of the rural areas, because federal courts are organized by district. And so those districts usually are almost without fail, bigger than whatever the state court jurisdiction is. Maybe not in Manhattan, but even the Central District of California that includes LA, includes Orange County, includes San Bernardino County, includes other counties. So sometimes, and then you have divisions within a district. I don't think that's the case in Minneapolis, maybe. But the divisions within the district will draw on its own jury pool as well. But so his jury pool will be actually a broader, more diverse jury pool than was the case in the prior state prosecution. The federal district court judge can be anybody, and then it's the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals that would preside over any appeal of that case. So I think at what point is this not piling on? I mean, he already faces tax charges. He's gonna do probably 15 to 20 years on the state prison side. I mean, this is getting, at some point, it's like having a sacrificial lamb and saying, well, we're not just going to kill him once, we're going to kill him 3 times.
Well, I mean, I know people are going to disagree, and especially since, tax charges and George Floyd are 2 separate things, but it's an interesting perspective.
And I don't have a problem with that. But the problem is, at some point, it's piling on is my problem. So it's. I mean, does anyone think that Derek Chauvin was put under tax investigation for any reason unrelated to George Floyd?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. It was almost the insurance plan in the event that he got acquitted on the murder, on the wrongful death, homicide, manslaughter, the 3 charges, that they would get him on tax afterwards.
Yeah, and apparently they're going to tag on a 2017 case that they say was excessive force. Now that I don't have as much problem with because it's totally separate from Floyd, aside from the fact that it looks like targeting an individual.
No,
I mean, figuring out how many crimes can we possibly charge this individual with,
and they're going after the expert to see if he got anything wrong in his 17 years of professional whatever he did for the state.
Now, one caveat, one potential benefit from those of us who care more about the law than Chauvin is that this will lessen the pressure on the Minnesota Supreme Court to do the right thing and clarify the felony murder rule in the state of Minnesota, because now it's not like they're going to be letting Chauvin walk. It's, well, he's going to get hit here, 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 and over here. So given that, they can actually follow the law maybe and don't feel as much political pressure to hang him on that particular aspect. And on the felony murder, there's 5 ways. There we go. I got my 5 in there. 5 ways to interpret the statute as it relates to a criminal statute. One is it has to comport with due process principles, which requires a mens rea. Like, if people wonder why we don't have felony negligence criminal statutes in the United States, it's because of In re Winship and a sequence of decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court that said you have to have a certain level, higher level of culpable intent before you can imprison someone for any substantial time period. So the first part is you have to look at, did it define a level of intent that's consistent with that constitutional due process requirement, that you can't lose your property, your liberty, or your life without due process of law under the 14th Amendment as applied to the states. The second aspect is the rule of lenity, which is also a due process principle, which is in interpreting a criminal statute, you have to interpret that statute in a way that's most favorable to the defendant and least favorable to the state. The third aspect in involving this particular statute is you can't have an absurd consequence. So, for example, if you're out there arguing that this is the proper interpretation of the statute, and maybe you're also saying it's an absurd outcome, then you're actually saying it can't be interpreted in that way for some commentators out there. So once you acknowledge that it's absurd, you're acknowledging it can't be interpreted that way under statutes of under the canon.
I mean, I've seen the tweets and I've seen what Nate says. I just think people are actually not understanding and actually not disagreeing, because I'll post the clips where we've discussed this specifically, that it's an absurd interpretation of a law. Not that we don't understand what the law is, that it's an absurd application interpretation. And if the interpretation leads to an absurd result, then it has to be an absurd interpretation that can't be retained.
Because it's about interpreting the statute at the end of the day. And if one of the canons of statutory construction is you cannot interpret a statute in a way that either makes the statute unconstitutional or that makes the statute create an absurd consequence. And in Minnesota in particular, they've recognized the felony murder doctrine as a statute that codifies the common law, which means you have to look at the common law interpretation of felony murder in interpreting the statute. And last but not least, it was the Minnesota Supreme Court that said, it can't just be any felony. It has to pose a special danger to human life. And that includes both the elements and as applied to the facts. That was the instruction that the defense requested. The judge didn't grant it. But in my view, that has to be incorporated in it. And it's just because the model jury instructions in Minnesota never did anything with that Minnesota Supreme Court decision about a decade and a half ago. So that's why I think the question isn't how you could possibly interpret the statute or how this court did. I think sometimes there's a tendency to conflate what a judge says the law is with what the law actually is. What the judge says, though, that's confusing power with principle. My view is, Dershowitz's view, others' views, the same way. The principle of felony murder under constitutional restrictions that apply and existing Minnesota law that applies requires that it be interpreted to have a higher level of mens rea than simply to have no intent to harm at all. Well, and if that happens, you can go to prison for 40 years.
And that's
what doesn't make sense.
No, and I had thought, I was just trying to think of hypotheticals. People are going to disagree because it will not be excessive force, which was the underlying assault that led to the felony murder. A totally non-violent felony. I would say tax fraud. How about just fraud, where you're getting someone, not extortion.
Well, I'll give you a simpler one. You just scare someone as a prank. That's all you're trying to do. They have a heart attack and die. In Minnesota, you can go to 40 years in prison for felony murder.
On that example, I'd have an easier time appreciating that you could. I'm thinking more like fraud, outright fraud, financial fraud, where the person crossing the street to get money to pay off the fraudulent demands gets hit by a car or commits suicide because they find out they've been defrauded. Is that felony murder? I'm trying to think of a absolutely non-violent.
Any death that tied to any felony under that interpretation can fit it. That's why the Minnesota Supreme Court said the underlying felony has to impose a high risk, serious risk to human life, and the facts of the case have to impose a serious risk to human life. And if your level of intent is misdemeanor assault level intent, you don't meet that. And so the key is whether they have the political will to do that. And they have the same problem with third degree devious mind murder. It's supposed to be to multiple people. But I think one utility of this legally is the courts now have more freedom to not worry about the political fallout from such a decision, because they're going to prosecute Chauvin on everything and everywhere else possible. So there's no chance their decision will not impact Derek Chauvin. And that hopefully means the law will actually be affirmed.
All right. Well, from one civil rights violation to another potential civil rights violation, Ashley Babbitt's family and their lawyer have announced that they're going to be filing civil rights violation, wrongful death against the police officer who shot Ashley Babbitt and the Washington Police Department as a whole. It's going to be this. It is going to be the same provision of law that they're going to sue under?
No, because it's a federal officer. So you don't have the federal civil rights laws only apply to state officers. So like any claim Giuliani would have, any claim, and we'll get into it later, the Alaskan folks who got illicitly raided, and Ashley Babbitt all come under federal law, not under state law, or not under the federal civil rights law that only applies to state actors. So they would be filing a Bivens claim or a claim under the Federal Tort Claims Act. And that requires an extensive process. The Federal Tort Claims Act, you have to exhaust all your administrative remedies first to be able to sue, because then in the Federal Tort Claim Act context, you're actually suing the United States government. If you're suing the individual officers, that would be a Bivens claim. And it's called Bivens after Bivens versus 6 unnamed federal agents, a U.S. Supreme Court case that established you can bring a constitutional rights violation claim against federal officers. I mean, you used to be able to do this all the time. I mean, after our founding, you could sue anyone who violated your rights under common law tort theory, and it was a defense whether the person was doing so under the authority of the government within the constitutional limits that imposed. Our courts have butchered that over time and diverted it to where it's become just the opposite, where you have to prove as a plaintiff that they were violating civil rights and civil liberties, and often won't even let you sue. So now the key in the Babbitt case will be the same question that shows up in most of these cases, which is, would a reasonable police officer have pulled the trigger? And that will be based on all the circumstances known to a reasonable police officer at the time. It's an objective standard in that sense. So it doesn't necessarily matter what he subjectively thought for a civil claim, unlike potentially a criminal claim. It only matters would a reasonable police officer have done what he did. And in my view, and in talking to a range of law enforcement people that are experts, because I'm employing them for some other cases that I have, they don't see how that was what a reasonable police officer would do. It's fascinating to me that on the left, same people screaming defund the. Sorry,
they don't see, or they do think it was a reasonable response.
They don't think a reasonable officer would have done that summary execution. Okay. And seeing the same people on the left who want to cheer defunding the police celebrate that summary execution tells you how politically motivated and corrupted our legal left has become. If Ben Crump was a legitimate civil rights person, he would be as bothered by that summary execution as any other case he's had. Yet he's not. He's mute on it. And so it's a sign of the corruption of the civil rights legal part of our system, particularly lawyers, but not only lawyers, in some cases, judges and others, that they don't recognize that these should be treated equally, because it's the same legal standard in question. Was this a reasonable exercise of force? And how was summary execution reasonable exercise of force?
One thing I didn't understand or didn't know until I read the article, it was in, I forget the article that I read, that I based the last video on, but the officer was plainclothes, which I didn't think was the case to begin with. So that's a fact which may or may not turn out to be true.
It makes him look worse because, in other words, his ability, he can't say, hey, look, this person saw me as a police officer there in my police uniform, pointing a gun and saying something, and still was going forward. In fact, there's no evidence he saw anything because I mean, his gun sort of comes out from behind. We don't even see him, and he just shoots. And by the way, he shoots. This is like Breonna Taylor case. He shoots while there's officers around. I mean, there's no guarantee that gun isn't going to go somewhere else. She had no weapon. We know that, but also there's nothing visual to say she had a weapon. So how is misdemeanor trespass worth summary execution? And the only excuse I've heard is, well, maybe he was afraid that she was going to kidnap someone. Kidnap who? They'd already left. So and how is that going to happen? And why wasn't there a warning given? I mean, this is summary execution. That's what this was. So the same people that have no problem convicting Chauvin say that guy shouldn't even be charged. That's a completely contradictory position that, frankly, can only be motivated by political bias, in my view. Now, her problem is the suit's probably going to be in D.C. So it'll be.
Well, it's going to be in D.C. It's going to be in D.C. This is after investigators investigated to determine whether or not to bring charges, I guess, internally against the officer, and they declined. So, what weight is that going to have in terms of?
Oh, they won't have any weight. I mean, it would have weight if they brought prosecution and secured convictions because it would establish that it was unreasonable use of force. But so it removes that option from the Babbitt family, but it doesn't have any other legal weight or evidentiary weight. So otherwise, I mean, the hard part is you'll have a jury pool in particular that is utterly unsympathetic and has been the most politicized. Like they remind me of 1950s all-white Deep South juries. That's what we have in D.C. right now. And that's the most problematic aspect in terms of strategically and tactically. But they should get to a trial because qualified immunity only protects what a reasonable officer would do under the circumstances. And they'll I'm sure, have expert testimony that will say a reasonable officer would not have done a summary execution for a misdemeanor trespasser.
Qualified immunity, do we call it an affirmative defense? Is it a defense on the merits of the action, or is it a bar to suit in the first place?
Well, it's kind of both. So that if qualified immunity is there up front, you have to disprove qualified immunity effectively as a plaintiff. So it's both a burden it can be an issue for the jury, or it could be an issue at summary judgment, or it could be an issue at a motion to dismiss. They use it these days. I mean, again, this was an invented doctrine that doesn't apply through the history of our constitutional republic. It's mostly over the last 20, 30 years or so when it's become a popular defense thanks to the U.S. Supreme Court. So they just invented another thing to excuse misconduct and malfeasance by federal politicians, in this case, law enforcement officers. And so but the way it functions is here, there's no question that there was a known constitutional right being violated. You have a right not to be shot. Sometimes that's the issue, because what they sometimes say is, yeah, we violated your rights, but the way we violated was so creative that it was totally new and we had no notice or knowledge that would violate your rights. I mean, and you see courts come in and rush to that preposterous excuse. But that won't be an issue here. Will be an issue here is whether a reasonable officer would have done what he did. And that tends to be a fact specific question in this context. So it's likely we'll get to discovery and we'll likely get to trial.
It's got to be filed first, and we'll see the lawsuit if and when it's filed. But the lawyers announced it. There's
it probably won't be until October because they got to wait 6 months to exhaust administrative remedies under the Federal Tort Claims Act.
So those were some delays mentioned in the article where he said they're going to file a notice within 10 days. They don't have to. They're not going to file a suit until they've exhausted the remedy under the federal. Right. I forgot the name of the act now. The federal. It
may come sooner if they say no, we're not going to honor the claim right away. But what it is they have 6 months. The feds do to respond. And they may wait the whole 6 months. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do. So, but they got to wait for that before they can file the suit. Now, they might settle the case too. That's always possible. I don't anticipate it in this context because the Justice Department concluded that no criminal prosecution would take place. The civil division will probably respond the same way, particularly given who is politically in control over those divisions right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see where it goes. It's I think this is going to be one of the ones where my opinion, initial reaction is going to have changed. I've seen the video now, and I've having read some additional information as detailed in this article. I'll read the lawsuit when it's filed, if it's filed. But Stephen Goldstein said self-defense. She was going through a secured area. Self-defense still has to be proportionate to the risk being posed. And
of course, it's amazing. The same people are saying that Rittenhouse doesn't have self-defense when people are grabbing his gun to take it away from him or pointing a gun at him or trying to bash him over the head with a skateboard, are saying this was self-defense because someone was walking through a door.
But
Come on.
Even if you explain it in a more lofty terms, she's going through a broken window that was just smashed through with somebody's helmet, and there were warnings, et cetera, et cetera. Seeing what was in the hallway, what was the imminent threat that could have justified objective, instant, deadly force, especially other circumstances.
There's officers behind her. Why aren't they physically arresting her if they saw this as a great threat? There's officers with machine guns behind her. So to say this was reasonable use of force, I could see someone that just defends cops across the board, no matter what, saying that. But almost everybody saying that is saying Chauvin should be lynched, and saying that saying Rittenhouse doesn't have self-defense. So it's like, I don't think so. That's just politics governing your decision. If she was African-American and a Democrat and that was a white cop, a 90% chance those same people reverse their opinion. That's the problem I have. The law is supposed to be one rule of law. And the rule is, was it for a reasonable officer to do it? And I know very few officers are willing to say that was reasonable use of force.
Yep. It's
George Floyd could have got up and drove in while under DUI and killed somebody. So didn't Chauvin, wasn't he justified in actually deliberately trying to kill him under that logic? These people haven't thought through the consequences of what they're saying. It's because, like I said, I think it's political bias that's driving it.
No, there's no question, and the circumstances are a little easier now that everyone's described it as an insurrection. It was, they're attempting to take over Capitol Hill. So any response,
we saw more evidence that didn't happen at all. Turned out even bear spray wasn't even used. That turned out to be another lie. Not only did they not kill the officer, they didn't kill or harm anyone. Turned out nobody had weapons. Apparently, turned out the person that had the tie things turned out not to be what they claimed they were. So all of their case keeps falling apart. All this this was a riot, and that's what it was. And you had some minor crimes related to it, but the idea that anybody's life was an imminent risk doesn't make sense. And from what I have seen, there's no evidence that officer or the officers next to him gave her any warning at all. There's no, hey, if you move another step forward, I'm going to shoot you right here. There's nothing like that I've heard.
Yep. All right. Well, to be continued, and then to be segued into another civil rights violation, the Alaska stuff. So at least some rumors are confirmed. Nancy Pelosi's laptop was stolen, and it's still at large, and they're going hard to find it. Now, I don't know who was wrongfully. Did they raid two places? Because I know that they raided a small business of a woman who apparently was there and looks like someone who was on camera in the vicinity of the laptop. Says she doesn't have it, but did they raid two locations or only one location to try to get this laptop back?
What I heard about was the raid of a residence. So and that at least that this person didn't look really much like the actual culprit at all. That when you look him close, you're like, what? So it may be either a wrong house raid or a wrong identification raid. I have a current case that's precisely on all fours in a certain context. A city of Fontana police officers raided my client's house with her and her young minor daughter, knocked down the door, all that jazz. They had the wrong address. They were so sloppy, they didn't even make sure they had the right address. They went up an alleyway and raided the wrong house or the back door. So the only reason why this happens at all is that the Supreme Court a couple of decades ago said it's okay to raid the wrong house as long as a reasonable officer wouldn't know you're raiding the wrong house. Because what actually happened is they went in and raided the wrong apartment, found criminal evidence, and the Supreme Court said you didn't even have to suppress it. You could use evidence you seized from a wrong address raid to actually criminally prosecute a person. It was a ludicrous decision. It's where, some of our conservative jurists have not been so good on the Constitution. When I hear people say they're always originalists, not on some things they weren't. So because that was kind of ludicrous. But the way it's the similar doctrine, what would a reasonable officer know? So if a reasonable officer would know they've got the wrong house or the wrong address or the wrong identification of the target, then they are subject to suit. Now, similar here, because it's the feds, it'd be under the Federal Tort Claims Act and potentially a Bivens claim. If it was in the state context, it'd be civil rights, but the same functional qualified immunity analysis applies. It's actually a little tougher to sue the feds than it is to sue a state officer. But the key is and you have to sort of break it down. Here, the fact she really doesn't look that much like the person, and apparently there were some other facts known. Like in my case, you have to dig into the whole record and file and figure out what's everything they knew. So like in my case, I found out that the person they were supposedly going to look at, they knew didn't even reside at the place that they were actually supposed to be searching, and that he wasn't there because they'd already arrested him about several hours before. And yet they were screaming, "Where is he? Where is he? He's in the jail, you idiots, put him in." So so sometimes you find some really, really good evidence. Now they're trying to hide the body camera evidence in that case. I can't talk about it because it's subject to a protective order for the time being. We're going to litigate it, but that's the new attempts of these defendants. We can't disclose this information to the public. It's scary, scary, scary. Though all this information is supposed to be public record under these kind of circumstances, where it only implicates there is no reasonable expectation of privacy in a body camera, according to the police officer's own rules. So we'll see what happened here. I mean, it was another over-the-top raid. There's that aspect. Problem one.
Oh, I'm trying to figure out how they think the laptop got to Alaska in the first place. Like what goes into getting these warrants for these raids, and what evidence do you have to show to indicate that the laptop has gone from DC to Alaska? Sorry. And
well, and the photos I saw, she didn't look like the other person they had a photo of inside the Capitol. So it's like, oh, hold on a second. So my guess is they were another over the top. But this is because on this issue, I mean, every day the FBI is sending out notices. Have you seen this person taking a selfie at the Capitol? While they're busy not catching people that are on their list that are potential risk that go and commit a mass shooting. They miss those people over and over again. But they're busy chasing down grandmas taking selfies in the Capitol. And here they just got the completely wrong person. And to me, I suspect that they had reason. If they'd done their job, they would have not raided the house or raided the property. I think that what's happened is that they've been given the green light to be uber aggressive. And remember, this happens after the president of the United States gets up and says about 75 million Americans are a worse threat than ISIS is. I mean, that's what he basically, because that's who he identified. Every Trump supporter is a white supremacist. And he said white supremacy is a greater threat than ISIS. I mean, it was a patently ludicrous claim, but when you're criminalizing half the country, you're telling your FBI, go do whatever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want. Treat it like it's Mississippi burning and there are no rules. That appears to be how they're applying things in this context, because a competent FBI would not have conducted that raid of that house, of that individual, given that there's enough dissimilarities between her and the person they thought they were looking for.
The argument is only going to be, you're only going to know that once you've gotten through the front door type thing.
Oh, that's what surveillance is for. I mean, so to me, that's what they're supposed to do this on warrants, and it's a problem. Like, in my case, they had done no meaningful surveillance. I mean, they had enough to know there's a problem, but they hadn't done meaningful surveillance. So that's how Breonna Taylor happens. You have people raiding properties they haven't marked out. They don't know whether there's little children in there. They don't know who's next door. They don't know who's supposed to be coming in and out. You're supposed to avoid all those problems with a search warrant by doing surveillance before you execute the search warrant.
Goldstein says if someone connected to the computer to the internet, then the signature of the drive was sent online connected. These drives have electronic signatures unless properly wiped.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm surprised they haven't tracked it down in a more normal method. I'm sure they didn't have that evidence in this context.
No, I was going to say, Stephen, if that's true, they presumably should have found the laptop at the location.
Yes, exactly. So. I mean, that's more reason why that was an unreasonable warrant.
And we got Lord Cuckoo Squirrel.
Yes, that's correct.
Says, Viva, another exception to double jeopardy, the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Yes, which is also, I understand that a little bit in the theory that if you're in the military, that you're under a separate set of rules that are governed independent of anybody else. But I just have problems with the principle of double jeopardy is one sovereign gets to, when it's the same sovereign effectively, functionally, one of them gets to pick prosecution, and that's it. And that should be all.
All right. We got Gary Herman, Mississippi Burning, first movie reference, second movie reference.
I like Gene Hackman.
Well, I was going to say second movie reference is Weekend at Bernie's, which seems to be the avatar on Gary Herman. Is it?
Yes, that is. That's Weekend at Bernie's.
I hope I didn't just insult somebody, because that could be someone who just looks like that scene from Weekend at Bernie's. Okay, very interesting. Well, it's just we'll see. The thing is, there's the waiting game now, and if and when there's going to be a suit filed, we'll see. It'll be 6 months down the line. No one's going to remember this, but maybe we'll refresh everybody's memory. What people will remember 6 months down the line, segueing into this one of the topics I know everyone wants to talk about, James O'Keefe. So he and I don't know, do we talk about the Twitter lawsuit? I think we talked about that last week, but there was
the CNN one.
Sorry, the CNN. Oh no.
I mean, we talked about Twitter, but we didn't talk about the CNN suit.
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, now I think you're going to have to introduce it because I'm not sure that I know enough about it.
Oh, I mean, it's basically a derivative of the Twitter claim, is my understanding of it. But it's basically what O'Keefe is doing is everybody who lies about him in a provable way, he's going to bring suits, no matter who they are, whether it's the New York Times, whether it's Twitter, whether it's CNN, either on his behalf directly or on the behalf and the behest of Project Veritas. And it's smart to do as sort of a part of brandishing his brand, to be able to prove in court that these people have been lying about him for a long period of time, but also to really discipline media. It was part of the reason I took the Covington kids case from the get-go. The goal was to show people you can fight back using the legal remedies available to discipline the media from using its superior power to crush weaker people or smaller parties just because of their politics. And he's taken that to heart, and he's going full scale on it. So I think it's a suit that should get past the motion to dismiss stage, and the discovery in that case should be very, very promising, because I'm sure that, I mean, obviously he has his own stuff with CNN already, but there'll be more stuff in there, because some of these people can't keep their mouths shut. They don't abide by the rules of never in writing and always in cash. These people love to yip away. As he himself has figured, just by sending a little Tinder date to talk to him. And so my guess is discovery will be a wide open field. And, the Sandman cases tended to be resolved quickly. So no public discovery ended up coming out of those cases. I think O'Keefe's objective and agenda is different. I think his agenda is to get into this discovery and publish this discovery, because it's what he does. It's who he is.
Well,
so I think you're going to see that.
Well, and it looks like they're going to get to discovery in the New York Times case, also the defamation based on the coordinated campaign of disinformation about the ballot harvesting, because
Andy did it.
Oh, well, New York Times filed a response. Now, I have a copy of it. It's not private; it's a public document, and I wanted to do a vlog on it. I just couldn't get around to doing it because it's long. But I'm going to do it this week at some point. But New York Times, admits, denies, ignores allegations, and basically made a number of admissions, which are going to be very damning. If James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, put out a video on it a few days ago, go ahead and watch it. It's great. But New York Times has made some admissions which are very damning, in that they basically admit to having been the ones who coordinated this campaign, which might turn out to be a disinformation campaign against Project Veritas. Didn't vet sources as per their ethical duties. And there was a third admission that they made. Oh yeah, that Maggie Astor doesn't write opinion. So the whole defense that no one would take this as fact but opinion, they basically undermined their own defense. And so it's going to be a glorious discovery. Having seen James in his video, I don't believe there will ever be a settlement unless it's going to be the most embarrassing and public settlement ever. But stay tuned for that, because that one is the lawsuit that really is making its way forward quickly. Their motion to dismiss was dismissed. They filed a defense or a response, and it makes some pretty damning admissions. So yeah, James is on a mission.
Absolutely, and credit to O'Keefe. What he also realized is something that I did utilized in another case for Cassandra Fairbanks. And my argument was, one of the reasons also to file these suits is, even if you can't get past certain motions to dismiss, you can get them to admit. And like in that case, we sued a reporter, Emma Roller, and the goal was to expose her for the fraud that she was, but to also get her to say in her response, to say either, you know what, I'm such an idiot, I don't know how to do basic reporting, or I'm a hopeless liar, because it was to sort of corner him that way. And my point to people at the time was, you can get the media to do this, like Rachel Maddow did against One American News Network. I'm so incredulous that nobody could believe anything I ever say as a statement of fact. Right? That's what Rachel Maddow said. Look at how the media used it against Sidney Powell when they mischaracterized her defense against Dominion. You can play that game the other way around as well. And so it's great to see O'Keefe utilize that, because it's getting the New York Times to admit things like, nah, all these journalistic standards we claim to follow, we don't follow. And you know what? Even though we're saying that's in the news section, it's really all disguised opinion and propaganda. And, and yeah, we do have agendas against particular people. So, I mean, this is extraordinary admissions that are worth their own value, independent of what else happens in the case.
But you know what? My cynical side is saying the people who read it are simply not going to care anyhow. So they're going to lose 10%. They're going to push some people away in the middle. They're going to awaken some people. But the people who are watching this and believing it are not going to care, or they're not even going to get to find this out because they're just so...
Some will, some won't. I mean, I think Emma Roller has disappeared. Her journalistic career went bye-bye. So I've seen it have tangible impact, because they like to think that they're the Columbia School of Journalism, and to say in a legal filing that you're doing opinion disguised as news, that you don't check sources, that you don't vet things, that you don't ask the other person for a response before you publish basic rules of journalism, then they claim to be the gray lady of journalism. These are damning admissions. So I'm sure the political patrons will ignore it, but there'll be a lot of other people that will find it problematic and troublesome.
Now, I see Bruce Leroy put in 4 super chats, and it's the same super chat, and I hope that was not a mistake, because, Bruce, this happened once before, and I asked YouTube if I could reimburse a super chat, and they said no, they don't have that function, which is a very convenient function for YouTube not to have, because it seems like a no-brainer if you want to give back someone's super chat, primarily because you don't like their comment, was one of the reasons, or you don't want to endorse that comment. So, Bruce, thank you. I hope that was not a mistake, and if it was, let me know, and if it's going to break the bank, let me know, because I will feel guilty if that is a glitch that led to that. The New York Times, I said it in the video, it's trash. It is not worth the paper it's written on. It is not dignified of its reputation, of its history. It doesn't even deserve the history it once had. It's worse than the National Enquirer, because nobody expects to get real news out of the National Enquirer. You read it with a stink eye of skepticism, whereas people read the New York Times thinking it is the standard for news, when it is the standard for propaganda. I won't say state-sponsored. It's the standard for propaganda.
Yeah, it's not the great lady of journalism. It's the dead lady of journalism.
Yeah. And Gavin Cross says, love your show. Almost never have time to see it all at once, but I always watch it all. Buy a shirt and tie, Viva. Never. I was going to wear a t-shirt tonight. In fact, I've got 4 shirts at the dry cleaner that I've got to get. Thank you for the reminder, and thank you for the super chat, Gavin. Okay, let's move into one someone asked about it before. I want to get into it because there's something about the story that really upsets my stomach. The menthol ban, and the justification being used by the government in power to support the ban. For those of you who don't know, I think most jurisdictions, most countries have already outlawed flavored cigarettes. And I think most include menthol, which is minty cigarettes. Canada had it a while back. The UK, from what I understand, also has it. I think Australia has the same thing. It leads to innovative designs like little minty cap things you can put on regular cigarettes, whatever. But they banned it, and the rationale for banning flavored cigarettes, minty cigarettes, is to decrease the allure to children, as if kids are smoking these things for the flavor anyhow, but whatever. So that's the rationale. The FDA has had it on their to-do list since 2013, or it's been on their list for a while, but the administration's rationale that I found offensive, and I'm not looking to get offended for anybody else who's not me. When I read the justification, I said, this reeks of the soft bigotry of low expectations, if not outright bigotry. The justification was, we want to protect the kids, and racial minorities smoke menthol cigarettes more, and apparently a lot more. Like 85% of African Americans smoke menthol cigarettes. I think it was upwards of 50% of Hispanics, 37% Asians, and 27% white. I don't know what explains the demographic, but it is not the fact that they get hooked on it early, because African American young people don't pick up smoking as much as white people do. So it actually, the rationale for banning it doesn't seem to make sense on its face. But I found it somewhat shocking, somewhat offensive, and somewhat surprising that no one was commenting on this, that in their justification, the administration is effectively grouping on the same level of independence and agency minors and children with racial minorities as it relates to the justification for banning this. Tell me I'm wrong, or tell me I'm right, or just tell me that I'm too sensitive. Or
No, I think that's exactly how Biden, defines who is and who isn't black as we go back from his campaign. It's very much a patronizing approach to a community. It's not seeing people as equals. It's not seeing people as equally powerful or equally responsible or equally accountable or equally individual. It's identifying them by group and then treating them as lesser than. As Christopher Lasch, a great historian, explained, there's no greater contempt than pity. And that's how I see this. So I see it the same way. That the motivation for it, there could have been multiple motivations for it that would have been more politically acceptable than the one they're expressing. They're accepting, they're embracing one that's just very patronizing of an entire community.
And
we know better than you do, and you're really no better than kids. It's disturbing.
And if it's not that, it's even one step worse. They're basically saying we're going to deprive racial minorities of the product they like. Now you're going to have to just go smoke regular cigarettes. It's like we know which demographics like which. Now let's just go ban it under the pretext of protecting racial minorities when we're actually just penalizing adult racial minorities who choose to smoke that, as opposed to it made no sense. Especially since the rationale that if the statistics showed that kids were getting hooked on cigarettes because of menthol or flavored cigarettes, I could understand that. I'm not even sure that that's the case, but the justification they gave was just over the top, patronizing, and the word is soft bigotry of low expectations. No, and one person had asked a question, and it was tongue in cheek humor, but I asked myself the question: what's next? I mean, do they go after flavored alcohols? I'm genuinely wondering, and maybe you have an understanding of this in law. Could they just as easily go after wine coolers if that's like the gateway alcohol for kids?
Well, I've had a problem with all of this federalization of public health. I think these should be state, local-driven decisions, and I don't think it really. And I have this application to all drugs too, not just pharmaceuticals, but to drugs labeled illegal currently. I think that should have always been a state government-driven decision, not a federal government-driven decision. It's not. I mean, we didn't create a federal government to regulate people's consumer choices. And yet that's what we have in a bunch of contexts. And they always say it's for your own benefit, for your own health. But we've seen in the lockdown context where that can go. And that's why I've never been in favor of it, period. To me, none of it is constitutional, but they've allowed that. Courts have allowed that now for quite some time.
And I mean, what happens next? So it's going to be a ban. There's going to be
how much? Yeah, that's that pretty much. It's pretty hard to challenge those.
Because I mean, I don't know what the cigarette industries are going to lose. I don't feel bad that they're going to lose the business of the menthol.
Well,
it's just,
as you pointed out, people will find an end run around it. So
there's. I mean, I think from what I understand, they already have. It's just it was a peculiar holdout because they've got flavored and menthol vaping thingies as well. So it's.
Yeah. I'm sure they're going to be banning that, and they'll be trying to ban a bunch of stuff related to vaping. Trump even jumped on that bandwagon for a while. I'm just not a fan of that attempt to control products at the federal level. Should be a local issue.
Okay, so I know that we're going to run out of time soon, but I know people want to talk about the Second Amendment case that might be going to SCOTUS, and what was the other one? Oh, well, it'll fit into the New York gun manufacturer liability law. So, Second Amendment case.
There's also and the TikTok cop.
Okay. Oh, good one. So these might be what we close out on. The Second Amendment case going to SCOTUS relates to the difficulty that is involved in getting a concealed carry in the state of New York. Difficult to the point of virtual impossibility, where you have to show actual need for this type of potential self-defense, and apparently the threshold is so high that it's basically outlawed altogether. Yes. I don't know the history of the Second Amendment cases. I know Heller was the big one. I think I have an idea of what Heller was, but do you want to give us the historical context and then the specifics of this case and what you expect to occur?
Well, I mean, it's big because the Ninth Circuit affirmed Hawaii not allowing any conceal and carry. So it's in that context that they took it. So basically it's do your gun rights only apply inside your own home? Because that makes no sense to me. It's a right of self-defense, and it's the means of self-defense is the right to bear arms. But but the core interest it's protecting is the right of the individual to defend themselves against the state or anyone else. And that's what it's all about. In my view, it's a Second Amendment is a constitutional right to self-defense. Supreme Court said that effectively in Heller, said it similarly in McDonald. And in that context, I'm glad they finally took a case because they were skipping a lot of good cases. And people were getting concerned that the latest attack on the Second Amendment is to try to limit it to say, okay, you have a right to defend yourself and bear arms, but only inside your own home, nowhere else. You can't carry it with you anywhere to defend yourself outside of your own home. And that would effectively gut half of the Second Amendment. Because, I mean, more often than not, you need to defend yourself outside of your home. It's not just inside of your home.
And am I wrong? In one of the courts had actually equated the militia to a state militia, not an independent militia, like where they said that every state
had 100. I mean, the militia part, it does not limit the rest. The militia was simply a means and mechanism to protect, to enforce that right against the state in part. And so the attempts to use that to limit the rest of it is just not what the Second Amendment was about. Second Amendment was always about a right of self-defense by which the most effective means was bearing arms. And the militia component, in my view, is a separate component, not a limiting component. And it's as a bunch of courts have tried to come up with every pretext known to man so the state can deny you and deprive you of your means to defend yourself, including against the state if necessary. And so that's what it's about. And to me, that means the fact they took it, very, very strong sign. They're going to say the Second Amendment applies to a right of self-defense anywhere, any place, anytime. And so the restrictions on that have to conform with the Heller provisions, that the right to defend yourself is not limited to your home. And that's what that case means. And that's why it's very heartwarming for those of us who are Second Amendment purists that they took this case, because that's where they were attacking it in so many different jurisdictions across the country. And everybody kind of knows once they took it, given the current nature of the court, that it's highly likely the Supreme Court is going to step in and say that, in fact, because here's why. They wouldn't have got 4 votes to take it unless they were going to say, yes, Heller, the Second Amendment applies to a right to self-defense, including to bear arms outside of the home. It's a right across the board. And that's what New York law was more explicitly rejecting. New York was saying a right of self-defense does not give you the right to carry a gun outside of your home. In fact, concealing carries are so difficult in New York, it made part of a Billions episode, multiple Billions episodes about somebody using their political corruption just to be able to carry a gun with them. So it's long been a basis by which and I think they'll expand it, extend it, and it will change conceal and carry laws across the country.
Okay, it's interesting. My initial reflex was that they were going to take it to gut it, not to reaffirm the right. But that might
I don't think they wouldn't have got 4 justices to sign on, because the justices would have not interfered or intervened that don't want to expand gun rights. They wouldn't have voted to take the case. So the fact that there were 4 votes, in my view, means that they likely have the 5 votes to reverse. And while I've been a critic of Barrett in the gun context, she has shown signs of being a purist. So on the Second Amendment, I think she'll be a good vote. No doubt Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch will. So that only leaves, Kavanaugh and Roberts as swing votes. But I think that my guess is Kavanaugh will go the Second Amendment route as well, because I don't think the other 4 would have voted to take it if they didn't think they already had a 5th vote to rule their way.
Okay, that's interesting. I definitely don't have the depth of understanding of it that you do. I'm just more cynical and saying, the way things are going, they're going to take it and say, no, you have a right to self-defense in your home, castle doctrine only, and that doesn't apply outside of your home. So go satisfy the stringent burden to explain why you need a concealed carry to defend yourself against imminent threats in public, and we'll grant you one, and that means never granting them. What timeline on this? Like, how does it work?
So they've taken it, and then there'll be merits briefs and then oral argument. The decision may issue within the year, maybe next year. Sometimes it goes over, but we would anticipate a decision by summer in all likelihood.
Okay, very interesting. Which brings us into the second facet of this discussion. Explain what's going on. Do they want to allow gun manufacturers to be held liable for crimes committed with weapons out of New York?
Period. Basically, that's it. They want to drive gun manufacturers out of business.
Is this New York, or is this
state of New York?
Okay.
So, basically, they want to make them expand their liability so broadly. The one case that's trying to do it is the Sandy Hook cases against the gun manufacturers there, where the U.S. Supreme Court passed on taking, because there's a federal law that currently precludes this from happening. And so they're challenging a federal law that's on the books by doing so. But yes, basically they want to make it so that no sane gun manufacturer would manufacture a gun that could be sold in the state of New York because you could get sued into oblivion in the wrong political jurisdiction. That's what the New York state law they're trying to pass is.
I think I understand something about the federal law, and I think it was one of the issues that some people had with Bernie Sanders is that he supported the law to give immunity. Why? Explain
it was
some of
it, because gun manufacturers were going to quit manufacturing guns. If they could be sued for any use of their gun, then they were going to quit manufacturing guns. I mean, because they would be bankrupted in the wrong political jurisdiction. And so that's why the Fed stepped in and said, no, we want to make sure you continue to make guns here in the United States and protect gun manufacturers because we have some certain safety controls and other controls over that. And so we're not going to allow cities and states to pass these kind of laws or apply their existing laws to achieve that objective. And that's why the law is there. Now, the Supreme Court chose not to enforce it in the Sandy Hook case, though they could always enforce it later. So they just passed on the first pass of it. But I think this case is going to be a seminal case and more consequential ultimately than Heller because it will expand the Second Amendment right of self-defense in general. It's even though they didn't take my petition that I drafted for Michael Strickland, is the argument that I'd made was get these kind of arguments in front of the court because they may take another case, but you're making the policy argument as to why they need to take such a case. And to make clear, I mean, the argument in Strickland was more pure. It was say the Second Amendment protects self-defense, period. But this decision can achieve the same objective if they do so.
Okay, but if you just get back to the history of the federal law of giving immunity to gun manufacturers, I would imagine that somewhere down the line, even if you had the various lawsuits in various jurisdictions, it would work its way up to the Supreme Court where they would say, no, you can't go after the manufacturers of someone who used something properly. I say properly in the sense that it functioned as the product was intended to function, just with the wrong purpose. Much in the same way, driving a car into somebody, the car will function the way it was intended to be created. But if it's used for criminal purposes, the car manufacturer is not responsible for the criminal use of a product designed and that functions properly. So right. I would imagine it would get to a higher court, the highest court, and they would set that precedent so that you wouldn't have to worry about this. Why did they go by way of a federal law as opposed to allowing it just to work its way up and be resolved judicially by the highest court?
Well, because the fear was that state governments would pass their own laws, that without that federal law, you would be able to basically ban gun manufacturing in the United States by making them subject to easy liability. So the federal law was needed to preempt the ability of state governments to impose their own set of laws and rules that could effectively bankrupt gun manufacturers. So that's why it exists. Now, the state of New York may be assuming that either the courts won't enforce that law because of what they saw has happened to date in the Sandy Hook gun cases, or because they are anticipating changing that federal law, or they're believing that such federal law will change such that then the law will become enforceable. So that may be their objective, but it shows clearly what their objective is. I mean, if you're banning the manufacturing or sale of guns indirectly by bankrupting anybody through lawfare that actually manufactures and sells guns, haven't you effectively achieved the same objective of banning guns without having to do so directly?
My obvious logical concern would be, does someone who supports that idea, because they would want that, not appreciate the consequences of that? It would.
It's their goal. That's what they want to do.
Well, but it's not a reductio ad absurdum. It's just the reality is you would have car vehicles being vehicle manufacturers being sued. Manufacturers.
Well, yes, I agree that concept was applied across all industries, but they're only applying this to gun manufacturers.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And I guess to move on to only indirectly related, the officer who made a TikTok poking a little fun at LeBron James, suspended or fired?
Suspended. Not necessarily Twitter style suspended, where you're permanently suspended in the Orwellian terms, but suspended. And a great GoFundMe was organized for him. He's raised a lot of money through that for any legal fees or other costs incurred. But it's a clear-cut First Amendment violation in my view. So he makes a TikTok video making fun of LeBron James. Yes, he's in his uniform, and that's what makes the joke effective. But that doesn't change that it's speech that doesn't interfere with his duties. And so there's some problematic case law out there here and there. There was a bad case that came out of the Sixth Circuit related to a guy who got fired for something he said on Facebook because he was because it offended people at the 911 center because they misinterpreted what he said at Facebook. So you have some scattering cases. And what they're trying to do is claim, and it's the same with the Rittenhouse donor case, that he got doxxed. I think both of them have great First Amendment cases. The problem is that there have been some courts, and what the legal left is doing, or that part of the statist side of the equation, is what they're trying to do is define everything as protecting the sort of safe space of the workplace, and that if you say or do anything that upsets the mindset of somebody else, that offends somebody there, even though the Supreme Court has been clear that simply saying something that offends somebody in the workplace cannot be the basis to fire them, because by definition, any political speech can and usually is offensive to somebody. That's what they're trying to do. And there's been a couple of cases with Obama courts that have let that doctrine sort of get in to say, well, just say, hey, it makes our police force look bad in the local community. It's harder for us to do our job in the local community. We have officers who are offended and upset by it, though I doubt that's the case, frankly. That a lot more upset about LeBron James said than what they're.
No, there's no question. There was another officer who called him out on it, who was not happy with it, offered to sit down. Let me just bring this chat up. Greg McNeely: car manufacturers can be sued for defects, airbags, just like gun manufacturers can be sued for defects. Yes, but not for the product functioning as designed, just for malicious purposes. So
there's no defects. What they want to do is prosecute him for the gun working as designed. That some criminal misuses it for an illicit purpose, but for its proper design. That's what they're trying to do. Yeah, just so
nobody gets lost, nobody confuses the argument about a defect. If the barrel's blocked and whatever, something happens, yes, defective design, defective functioning, not proper functioning, but malicious intent. No, so the police officer, though, whether or not he was on work time. So I don't know the details.
Not on work time, is my knowledge.
So he's not on work time.
The only question was his use of a uniform.
Yes, well, that's the second part.
The police department, as a department, approved his message. And I don't take it as so. That would be the defense, but I don't see that as being the case. I mean, it's clearly he's making a joke. People know it's a joke, and so while he needed to be in uniform for the purpose of making that joke effective, people do things politically in their uniform all the time. So just being in your uniform has not usually been sufficient. And I didn't take it as him saying this is the official policy of our local police department to call LeBron James before we make an arrest or use force. So, I mean, I think that's not a reasonable interpretation of his conduct. And to me, what he was doing was speech. I mean, put it this way. Why is he really suspended? Because it was speech and because it was politically effective speech, not because anybody was confused about the official policy of the police department.
Well, no, I'm just like playing literally devil's advocate, because I don't have a problem with what he did. I didn't have a problem with that other sergeant who went after Tucker Carlson, where a lot of people said this is the military coming down on Tucker, on the media. I made a tongue-in-cheek joke about a hand gesture the officer made in his video, which could be taken out of context, in as much as the Jeopardy guy has been eating crow for the last week. But no, it was the use of the uniform. Someone might say, if he's wearing the uniform, he's on work, he's working. Or if he's using the uniform as a prop to lend credence, not necessarily to say that the police department endorses it, I can understand. But it's the idea that anybody would actually use this comedic, back and forth to, try to sensitize, to try to be funny and to try to be edgy, not in the derogatory sense, like insightful edgy, to suspend him and to give him a problem at his job. It is the weaponizing of the disciplinary sanctions for political purposes, because Lord knows if it had been the other way, and I hate the thought experiment, it probably would have not happened this way. But I mean, it's a tarnish. It's a joke. It's a lighthearted taking a poke at, punching up and not punching down. And now the guy's going to run into all sorts of problems. Yeah, potentially over the top response.
It's what the current sort of drive wanted to have happen. Wants local police departments to become so politicized that they'll either sacrifice officers as sacrificial lambs in certain high-profile cases, as the part took place in the Chauvin trial, or they'll politically fire people simply for giving money to Kyle Rittenhouse's self-defense, or making a joke out of LeBron James's absurd attempts to, target an individual based on misinformation. And so it's disturbing that this is happening with such regularity. In my hometown, a coach at UT Chattanooga was fired for some statements he made about Stacey Abrams, and so he's filed a First Amendment suit too. But it's increasingly this political weaponization of everything around to target dissidents.
it's just and some of these statements are not even made at work, and some of them made anonymously, but only obtained through illicit hacks that nonetheless really, end up losing your job. It's it's terrible. We've forgotten how to actually just tolerate ideas that we don't like, as opposed to pretending that every idea we don't like is an assault, a physical assault on our physical integrity, spiritual integrity. If we only have time for one more, Robert, do we do the cheese bit, or do you want to do locals questions?
I'll probably do some. I'll do some locals questions. There's also a good Supreme Court case up that's about the right of anonymous speech. State of California was trying to publicly dox donors to various political and other charities. And the U.S. Supreme Court back in the 1950s established, they tried to do this first to the NAACP in the 1950s, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, there's a right of anonymous speech. Then they tried to do it to people who put flyers around. Then they tried to do it in a range of other contexts over time. And you have the right to free speech is also the right to make your speech anonymous, and the state does not have a right to dox you to the world. They actually did it to Henry Wallace campaign supporters in 1948. They tried to identify all of his petition signers. The state of California is trying to do it to the people who signed the recall petitions for Newsom, and it's clearly meant to target them for purposes. Well, we can see in the TikTok cop example and the person who donated to Kyle Rittenhouse's defense fund, an attempt to target people, to dox and defame them and destroy them for their financial involvement in supporting various causes or candidates. And you have a right of anonymous speech. The only time you don't is if you're giving to a political campaign, then that information has a right to be disclosed. But everything else, you have a generalized right of anonymous speech is included within your right to free speech. And it looks like the Supreme Court is going to rule that way. So that will also be an excellent ruling if it comes down.
Well, and it'll be good for the officer. It'll be good for the the police officer who lost his job because of his anonymous donation and comment to Rittenhouse. But actually, audit info, the Arizona audit. We can't.
Oh yes. I mean, so there were some people that were nervous on our board, vivabarneslaw.locals.com, which about whether my prediction that the audit would go forward once a lot of anomalies happened last week. All of a sudden, well, it's kind of one party's fault, but they suddenly, the judge had to recuse himself. The new judge who came in had some interesting connections and ties. And my argument was it had just reached a certain level of profile. And this is why the court of public opinion matters for people that seek remedy and relief, that it had reached a certain profile in Arizona that court would be hard pressed to shut down the audit. And there are some people worried that that prediction of mine would not come true, but it did come true despite the judge substitution. And the attempts to gaslight this by the media is just nuts, because you have the media. Why is transparency so bad? I mean, somebody did a great meme. They said, here's the media's version of a transparent election. And it was those people in Philadelphia blocking the windows so nobody could even see inside what was going on, versus what they were saying was a totally secretive process, which was the live streaming of the Arizona audit where anybody in the world can watch what's taking place. The fact that the media is so terrified. You even had Jake Tapper say, oh, I'm concerned, what happens if they find the incorrect ballots or false ballots? Well, we should, probably do something about that. Nothing's going to happen with the 2020 election. People who think that's going to happen, no, sorry, that ship has sailed. But where it can matter is election reform going forward has a much stronger basis and foundation by what information they develop from this audit. Also, in my view, this should always be part of the process. We should have transparent elections. We should lead the world in election integrity, not trail it. We should follow the same procedures we demand every foreign nation do before we recognize their elections in their nations. And that requires a transparent process. The United States Election Assistance Commission recommended this precise method of audit more than a decade ago. So what they're doing, contrary to the media gaslighting, is precisely what bipartisan committees, blue ribbon commissions, including election integrity projects put together by Democratic secretaries of state over the last 10 years, including what the New York Times has argued experts agree to, is supposed to happen. You're supposed to be able to film it, be able to live stream it, see what's happening, check the machines, check the ballots, confirm the process, have public confidence. You don't just defer to the government. That's what people are asking me about, signature matches in Georgia. They're like, oh, a signature match occurred. Yeah, according to the state officials, the point of having partisan observers present, according to the United States Election Assistance Commission, is to make sure that we have full transparency so that we can have confidence in election integrity.
And I'm going to read this because I don't want it to disappear before I can read it. Cameron Vesey says, at the Viva Fry, pardon my French, but je suis le seul à vouloir me lever et me battre pour mon état et mon pays, et je suis putain de paraplégique. Means I'm the only one who wants to get up and fight for my province and my country, and I'm paraplegic. Help me, Viva One Kenobi, you're my only hope. Viva, let me live with Barnes, and I'll prove I'm no sane, woke, well-educated zombie. Thank you for the super chat, regardless, and thank you for the comment. And I've taken a screenshot, so we'll see. We'll see what we can do.
So for some of the locals questions about the vaccines, there's in terms of employer liability, the employers won't necessarily be liable under existing laws for requiring it in the sense of if there's health consequences from it. But where they can be liable is, in my view, just go back to last week's live stream. And we go through the emergency use authorization provision limits the ability to mandate this. And in my view, it violates anti-discrimination laws. I forget which state it was. I think it may have been Connecticut. A state in the Northeast decided to remove the right of, traditionally you have religious exemptions that are recognized to where you don't have to take a vaccine. They're trying to remove those exemptions. That has already been challenged in court. So because in my view, that goes against a whole host of other principles, including First Amendment principles. So we'll see but that's the short answer of that. But last week's live stream has a good discussion of that. And then actually the most of the other leading questions we addressed.
Scott, I think we only skipped a couple of them. The cheese bites, we can talk about it later. Maybe I'll do
bagel bites. Bagel bites may be lying to you. It may not be real tomato sauce.
Well, but we already have like Kraft singles. People don't appreciate. They can't call it cheese because it doesn't have majority cheese products in it. That's why they call them cheese slices or something. Look, there's some fun lawsuits. Bagel Bites getting sued for false advertising because they say it has cheese and tomato sauce when apparently it has too many additives to be considered potentially real cheese and real tomato sauce. So maybe a lighthearted vlog for when the news is slower, when we need a real distraction. But let's do this. 2 hours, 5 minutes, and there's some other people who are going live, and we should save some good stuff for the next week. Live stream tomorrow, 6 o'clock with Joe Kent. Wednesday, sidebar. Who do we have, Robert?
I believe this week is George Samueli. So he's the half of the gaggle and has a fascinating life history and parental and ancestors. His father, his grandfather, his great uncle. I mean, people who lived through the heart of all the revolutions in Europe in the 20th century. So there's a lot of fascinating components to his life history to get into that I think will be interesting for the audience. And then there'll be a live chat after party that's already started at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. And on Tuesday, a new Hush Hush will be up, which will be about whether this pandemic may have been as unplanned as it appeared to be. So I'll leave it at that for YouTube purposes.
If that doesn't get people whet their appetite to go check us out on Locals. And incidentally, even for the members who support this channel on YouTube, keep that in mind. If anything ever happens to this channel, you know where to find us on Locals. And that's it. So actually do take us out with something optimistic for the upcoming week, for the end of the evening, and then we'll stick around to say our proper goodbyes.
Well, really, I would say three great pieces of news this week. First, the Second Amendment case may meaningfully expand the self-defense doctrine and the right to bear arms in ways that has never been established by the Supreme Court until this year, and I think that will happen. Second, that the right to protection of anonymous speech is likely to occur based on the oral arguments that took place at the Supreme Court last week, and that is also a fantastic development, particularly in this age of doxing and attempts to harass those who make such donations. And then third, the fact that people went to the court of public opinion, whether it's the Ashley Babbitt family, whether it's Rudy Giuliani, whether it's the Alaskan folks, they were able to expose government misconduct in a meaningful way. And until and unless you win in the court of public opinion, you don't get things like the Arizona audit going forward, but for the success in the court of public opinion. So what everybody is doing out there and influencing the court of opinion continues to make a real and meaningful difference in the world, despite what obstacles we may face to see true justice take place over our justice system.
Fantastic. Everyone, before you leave, hit the thumbs up and just make that number go up before we leave. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for the support. You know where to find us, and find us on social. Robert, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. Everybody, peace out.